Hey guys, welcome back. Steve here with 6 Star Automotive. Today we're going to tackle a video I've been trying to get accomplished for quite a while now. So my plan is to go through this specific test from beginning to end, basics to slightly advanced, and even try out a couple of theories that I have to see if I can give you guys an edge when it comes to diagnostics in this specific system. So before we get started, as always, like, subscribe, and join me on the next video in our scope series, Secondary Ignition. So checking secondary ignition is not always necessary. I can't say that I do this on every diagnosis or even most diagnostics, but it can be very useful to help you get an idea of how healthy the engine is running. Is it rich? Is it lean? Is the spark strong enough? Does it have a misfire? What does a misfire even look like? Is it sparking outside of the cylinder? Is it sparking inside of the cylinder? I'm going to give you everything that I know of that I can give you that will give you some ideas of how to look at this waveform and tell the difference between all of the complexity that it offers. Let's get this thing running and see what we got. All right, so let's look at the waveform that we got from the scope. If you look, we're at a 1 volt scale, we're at 1 millisecond. We've got our ground position not very high because we don't want to let that kV spike go clear out of the screen. I mean, you can, it's really not the end of the world, but seeing that kind of where that is important. We're gonna get there in a second. But yeah, so this is what your line should look like. Let me give it a little bit of revs and you'll kind of see the whole pattern. So you see that part that came in from the left side? That is our, that's the dwell line, or that's the coil saturation line. Alrighty, so let's take a look at this waveform. I just froze it for us. So let's look at the basics of what a waveform looks like. So you're going to have a straight flat line, and that's your 12 volts. That flat line is going to drop. You'll see a coil oscillation, and then you'll start to see what's a saturation or a dwell. And that saturation is the primary coil energizing, and you'll start to see it go up on that waveform. And then once it saturates, you'll see the kV spike. That's that big line that goes up and down. So that spike lets us know how much voltage is necessary to obtain a spark. I can't really give you a number. I mean, it's kind of like compression, right? So you'll have a specification, but really having them kind of all be even is more of an indicator than anything else. So if you have one cylinder that's misfiring, all of them have a relatively even kV line except one that's way down here or way up here, you know, then that's kind of the difference. I mean, I think generally speaking, you're looking at about 20,000 volts. It could be less depending on compression and a bunch of other things. But again, I'm not too concerned. Somebody's going to say something. Somebody always says something. The next line is going to be your burn line, and that's or the spark line. That's the line that comes directly after the kV spike, and it is the amount of voltage necessary to keep the spark going. It's kind of like pushing a rock. As soon as you start pushing the rock, you're going to take a lot of, but once you get it going, it's a lot easier to push the rock. You know, the theory, the law of physics, blah, blah, I can't remember what they all are, but the object in motion tends to stay in motion, and an object at rest tends to want to stay at rest. Same concept with electricity. You're going to have, once you get it moving, it's easier to move. So your spark, the voltage necessary to keep the spark going is less than the voltage necessary to get the plasma running across that gap. So this is really important, is this spark line is kind of where a lot of this information is going to rest. How does it look? How long is it? What shape is it? Where does it curve? All this kind of stuff is going to be what we're going to go over, but just that's the spark line. Know that. And then after the end is when the coil shuts off, and that's going to be your turn-off oscillations. When we did our primary coil video a while ago with the turn-on oscillations and the turn-off oscillations, same thing, right? Residual energy resonating, the ringing in the coil, you should have oscillations. All right, with that out of the way, let's look at what we have specifically in this car and see if I can come up with some ways of tweaking this waveform to kind of give us some ideas of what it should look like with weird things happening. Okay, so now if you look right here, our spark line kind of goes down. You see that? And at the very end, it arcs back up, and then you see our turn-off oscillations. I'm going to give it a little bit of snap and see what it does. I can see. So you see that? What's interesting to me is that the spark line is kind of hashy, if you notice that, right? If you think about the turbulence that's happening inside of that cylinder, it makes perfect sense that, you know, with all that air whipping around, all the air fuel that's mixing and kind of mashing you, right? Don't expect it to be that textbook waveform. That's like, if you learn anything about how these things work, how cars work in general, textbook is good, but it's not, don't expect everything to be textbook. Be able to kind of think outside of in a spectrum, you know what I mean? What's good, what's bad, right? What's acceptable. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to change this guy over to a cylinder that I can easily get to. Let's see what make sure that our waveform still looks good. Oh, this is fantastic. Because we have two, it's going to be inverted. This is fantastic. Okay, so if I invert the signal, ooh, look at that beauty. This is so cool. Alrighty, learning opportunity. On these Subarus specifically, it has a twin coil pack. It has 4 cylinders, but it only has 2 coils. So that means that this is a waste spark ignition. Waste spark ignition, goodness gracious. How am I gonna, okay, so basically one coil is going to fire both cylinders through the block, right? So one of them, it's going to fire one on its compression stroke, and its companion is going to be on its exhaust stroke. Basically, you have a wasted spark every time one of the spark fires. It's going to ground through the other spark, and then it's, how do I say this? And so what you're going to end up having is that the spark is going to go from the inner electrode to the outer electrode on one, and on the other side it's going to go outer electrode to the inner electrode and then back. So cool. So you'll see a lot of times on a waste spark ignition, you'll notice that on some of the plugs, they're worn on the bottom electrode, and some of the plugs they're worn more on the top electrode. It's pretty cool. So now what I'm going to do in this one is that I'm going to pull this spark plug wire off, which means it's going to misfire, but the spark is still going to happen, right? It's going to jump to the spark plug, and it's probably not going to be able to, let's just see, let's look at the waveform and let's see what happens. I'm going to pull this guy off. See what it looks like. Look at that, interesting. Look at that. That is very cool. So I'm going to move it a little bit more. Don't shock me. There we go. Okay, now let's look at this. So now we know we have a secondary ignition miss. Look at how high and low it's going. That spark line looks like garbage. It's really short. You can hear it. Hear this? Now we're going to go back to the cylinder. We're going to connect to the plug. Look at that. Much lower line, longer spark line. And you can see that it's actually firing inside the cylinder. So you see how it's, now let's look at it again. We're going to look at it differently. It's firing outside the cylinder. Okay, look at that. See what that looks like? So this is what, so we have a short spark line, even, no hash going on, and it's going directly outside of the cylinder. So be mindful of what that looks like and what this should look like right here. This looks very nice. This is so cool. Okay, next thing I want to check is a lean condition, because I have a theory that, if you think about this for a second, right? I mean, as the spark goes across that, as the plasma goes across the spark line, if it is richer in the mixture, you would think that it would be easier, less voltage required, in order for it to get across the gap. So my theory is that if we richen the mixture up, the spark line should dip toward the end, and if we lean it out, the spark line should rise toward the end. Let's see if I'm an idiot or not. Let's try this. I am going to pull a vacuum line. So I'm going to go to cylinder 4, because that one's directly where that vacuum hose is being connected. I want to see what happens when I lean out that cylinder. Back. So I'm noticing, if you're looking at this with me, I'm noticing that the spark line now is actually pretty consistent. When I lean it out, it gets, look at that, you get hash. Look at that, it does seem kind of to go slightly up. Let's see it again. See that? Boom, and it curls up at the end. gosh, it's not extreme, but it's there. Let's do it again. Now we're at normal, and we're kind of missing a little bit now because we've probably got a bunch of fuel. Okay, let's get this thing cleaned out a little bit. Okay, let it even out. Now let's give it some lean. Ready, go. Look at that. Very interesting. So, and you got to think, the computer is constantly trying to fix what I'm doing. It's going to immediately raise the pulse width when it notices all of that extra air going in. So we don't have a whole lot of time from a genuine lean condition to a compensated for lean condition with the fuel trim. So let's do it again. Bang. 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 So look at that, how it just, the end where the spark line ends, it spikes really high. Boom. Very interesting. Okay, now I want to try, let's kind of clean it out a little bit here. I've got some carburetor cleaner, and I want to see what happens if I fill it full of fuel, what it's going to do. Let's see. Look at that. We're compensating again. Let's go back. Super rich. Look at the line. Let's go lean, rich, lean, rich, 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 lean, rich. Don't miss, don't die. Come on. Lean, rich, rich misfire. Look at that. Back. This is so curious. Look at that, it's so beautiful. Okay. I saw a video once, long time ago, where these two guys were going off of these waveforms. They had an old school Sun machine out, and they were doing this basically, and it was so crazy the amount of stuff that they knew about. You know, they're looking at a waveform and they're like, hey, the spark line's this thick and this long and this hashy and this angle and all, and they're like blah blah blah, lean, and I'm just like, man, you know, it's good to know. It's just putting this into application. You know, this isn't going to be okay, car comes in with misfire, unless it's a, you know, a car like this where you got wires that are easily exposed. You can kind of quickly go to bang bang bang. What does it look like? You know, like right now, let's take a look real fast. We're going to go cylinder 4. This is our cylinder 4. Let's look at cylinder 3. Okay, now we know we're going to need to invert, and we're going to go to cylinder 1. Cylinder 1 looks a little hashy. Look at this. Is this me? Look at that. Okay, so let's go back to cylinder 4. Okay. Let's go back to cylinder 1. Very interesting. So, and this would be something that would be curious for me. I'd like to see what this car looks like before and after a fuel induction service. This is you know, because what do we have? What if we have dirty injectors, nasty spray patterns? You know, this is the kind of stuff that we might be looking at. Build up in the cylinder with carbon deposits and that kind of stuff. You know, without knowing what it looked like before and then after a service like that, you know, you're not really going to have an idea of what these differentiators could be indicating. Whatever. Alrighty, so let's get into a little bit more about what these individual sections of the waveform mean and what they can be telling you. Okay, so what's going to influence your KV line could be things like plug gap, cylinder pressure, compression. So the burn line is going to tell us combustion quality. What is the quality of the combustion event that just happened? A longer burn line is going to indicate more healthy combustion, richer combustion. So a short spark line in relation to what the other ones look like can be an indication of a lean mixture, a misfire, or just poor combustion. So again, with the spark line, the intensity of the spark line, the height is indicative of how difficult it is for that plasma stream, that spark, to maintain its burn across the gap. So if it's, you would think if it's higher, so let's watch this. We're going to give it a little bit of turbulence and see if this line, see how the line increases? The line goes higher as we increase the pressure. Bang, bang. So if you have higher compression, if you have, well, anything that's more turbulence inside the cylinder, you're going to have a more erratic signal. If you have an excessive amount of that burn hash, you might want to look into fuel injectors being clogged, doing like an upper intake kind of service to kind of help even those things out. So that's another indication of where you should go. I mean, like I said, you're going to have some hash, and it's not going to be what's going to like cause it to be in your bay, but the aim small, miss small, right? So I know the first thing you're probably going to say is, well, what about anything that's newer than 2004, like this guy is, that doesn't have wires or an external coil? That's fair. And that's one of the reasons why I kind of said at the beginning that the likelihood of you going into this type of diagnostics, right off the bat isn't extremely high. But what you can do is they sell, Pico has these specifically, but you can get like a wire extender. So you pull out the COP, the coil-on-plug, you put in the wire, and you put the wire onto the spark plug, and then you can actually grab it with a secondary probe. I mean, you're going to have to determine if that's necessary. If you want to see what things look like inside that cylinder, again, not a bad idea if it's necessary for the type of diagnostics you're doing. I mean, don't kick the car out of the bay before you've done it. You know what I mean? Don't give up before you've done it, but don't let it necessarily be the first thing that you do, because as you can see, the amount of time that would be required to do that. Maybe a Honda with coil packs on the top, big deal. But a Subaru with a coil on the side and you're hitting the frame rail, you're going to have to use your noodle to see if that is worthy of that amount of diagnostic time. And make sure that you're doing what's necessary and that you're doing legitimate tests and you're getting paid and charging for the proper diagnostics. Don't do diagnostics for free, and don't charge for diagnostics that aren't worth what you're charging. Another thing, since I can't really, there's only so much that I can do on a good running engine. Like I can't show you low compression. If you do have a car that has low compression and you can do this test somehow, it would probably be a good idea to just take a couple of minutes, set it up, get the waveform, save it, take a picture of it, do whatever you got to do to keep that information, just so you have it in the memory banks. Oh, that looks like low compression. That looks like a super lean condition or a bad injector. And maybe if you have a bad injector, hook up to the secondary, take a waveform and save it. Save it in here, save it over there. Find a way of kind of getting, the more you do this, just like anything, the more repetition, the more practice, the more experience, the more you're going to look at that waveform and go, all right, so what are our key takeaways? We now know what a secondary ignition waveform looks like. We know how to get one on the scope. Make sure that you're on the right polarity. You don't want to see this thing upside down if you're looking at like a wave spark like we did before. And the burn line and your KV line, make sure that those guys look consistent with the other ones. You can, like we did here, let's go 1, let's go 4. See the difference? 4, back to 1. Very good stuff. All right, guys. I hope this helps. If you have any questions or critiques, please try to remember, this is a beginner's type class. Like, I'm not trying to say that, this will teach you how to be a master of secondary ignition. Obviously we're not looking at parade patterns, but if you don't know anything about secondary ignition, it'd be a good idea to get this under the belt, do some tests, then we can go into more advanced stuff. Hope you guys learned something from this. Thanks for watching, and always remember, you can come by and experience the 6-star difference for yourself.